Acts of the Apostles, chapter 25, lesson 26. In studying this chapter, 1. To consider the circumstances in which Paul appealed to Caesar, and 2. To observe Paul before King Agrippa. Shortly after Festus arrived in Caesarea, he went to Jerusalem. The high priest and chief men informed Festus of Paul. They petitioned him, asking Festus a favor, to bring Paul back to Jerusalem. The Jews planned to kill Paul along the road as he traveled. Festus indicated that he would shortly be traveling back to Caesarea and invited those Jews in authority to travel there as well. They could accuse Paul there. Acts 25, 1-5. Festus, therefore, having come into the province, after 3 days went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. Then the high priest and the principal men of the Jews informed him against Paul, and they begged him, asking a favor against him, that he would summon him to Jerusalem, plotting to kill him on the way. However, Festus answered that Paul should be kept in custody at Caesarea, and that he himself was about to depart shortly. Let them therefore, he said, that there are in power among you, go down with me, and if there is anything wrong in the man, let them accuse him. After remaining in Jerusalem about 10 days, Festus returned to Caesarea. He called Paul before the judgment seat the next day. The Jews attended and laid serious complaints against Paul. However, they could not prove them. Acts 25, 6-7. When he had stayed among them more than 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and on the next day he sat on the judgment seat, and commanded Paul to be brought. When he had come, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around him, bringing against him many and grievous charges which could not be proved. Paul answered, Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I offended in anything at all. Festus then asked Paul if he would go to Jerusalem with him. He suggested that he would judge Paul there. This was recommended to Paul because Festus wanted to do the Jews a favor. Paul responded that he stood at Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be judged. He told Festus he had done no wrong to the Jews, as you very well know. Acts 25, 8-10. While he said in his defense, Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I sinned at all. But Festus, desiring to gain favor with the Jews, answered Paul and said, Are you willing to go up to Jerusalem and be judged by me there concerning these things? But Paul said, I am standing before Caesar's judgment seat, where I ought to be tried. I have done no wrong to the Jews, as you also know very well. Paul was willing to die if he had committed anything worthy of death, but he had no guilt of the things for which the Jews accused him. Paul was not going to be delivered to the Jews. He was a Roman citizen. Paul then appealed to Caesar. Festus replied, You have appealed to Caesar? To Caesar you shall go. Acts 25, 11-12. For if I have done wrong and have committed anything worthy of death, I don't refuse to die. But if none of those things is true that they accuse me of, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. Then Festus, when he had conferred with the council, answered, You have appealed to Caesar you shall go. A few days later, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus as the new governor, replacing Felix. Festus laid Paul's case before Agrippa. He noted that Felix had left Paul a prisoner with his case not resolved. He recalled that the chief priests and elders of the Jews informed him about Paul during his recent visit to Jerusalem. Festus recounted to Agrippa that he had told the Jews that it was not a Roman custom to deliver the accused for destruction without the accused having the opportunity to answer the charges face to face. Acts 25, 13-16. Now when some days had passed, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. As he stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, There is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom, when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me, asking for a sentence against him, to whom I answered that it is not the custom of the Romans to give up any man to destruction before the accused has met the accusers face to face, and has had opportunity to make his defense concerning the matter laid against him. Upon Festus's return to Caesarea, He had Paul come before the judgment seat. He discovered nothing wrong in Paul, other than there were some questions about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. Festus asked Paul to go to Jerusalem, since he was uncertain about these matters. At that point, Festus noted that Paul appealed to Caesar. Acts 25:17-21. When therefore they had come together here, I didn't delay, but on the next day sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man to be brought, concerning whom, when the accusers stood up, they brought no charge of such things as I supposed, but had certain questions against him about their own religion, and about one Jesus who was dead, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. Being perplexed about how to inquire concerning these things, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul had appealed to be kept for the decision of the emperor, I commanded him to be kept until I could send him to Caesar. After Festus's explanation of Paul's case, Agrippa requested to hear Paul himself. Festus said to Agrippa, "Tomorrow you shall hear him." Paul was brought before King Agrippa the next day, following much pomp upon the entry of Agrippa and Bernice into the auditorium with the commanders and other prominent men of the city. Festus explained the situation to Agrippa and the others. He reported that the Jews claimed Paul was not fit to live any longer. Acts 25:22-24. Agrippa said to Festus, "I also would like to hear the man myself." "Tomorrow," he said, "you shall hear him." So on the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice had come with great pomp, and they had entered into the place of hearing with the commanding officers and principal men of the city, at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. Festus said, "King Agrippa, and all men who are here present with us, you see this man, about whom all the multitude of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying that he ought not to live any longer." However, Festus stated that he found Paul had committed nothing deserving death. He noted that Paul had appealed to Caesar, and he was going to send him. Festus indicated that he had nothing to write to Caesar about Paul. He hoped that after Agrippa's examination of Paul, he may have something to write. He thought it was unreasonable to send an appeal to Caesar without specifying the charges. Acts 25:25-27. But when I found that he had committed nothing worthy of death, and as he himself appealed to the emperor, I determined to send him, of whom I have no certain thing to write to my lord. Therefore I have brought him forth before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, that after examination I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not also to specify the charges against him. Acts of the Apostles, chapter 25, lesson 26, the end.